Lieutenant Commander Zara Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto Station Kepler-7, her worn leather weapon harness drawing immediate stares from the assembled Galactic Defense Force officers. The antique sword at her hip seemed absurdly primitive among the plasma rifles and quantum disruptors that filled the station's armory. She had grown accustomed to the looks, the whispered comments, the barely concealed amusement that followed her wherever humans served alongside the more technologically advanced species. The station commander, a tall Vorthan with crystalline skin that refracted the overhead lights into rainbow patterns, approached with measured steps. Admiral Kesthok had requested this meeting personally, though Chen couldn't fathom why. Her service record was exemplary, but unremarkable by galactic standards. She commanded a small human frigate on patrol duty along the Outer Rim, far from the important battles that shaped the galaxy's future. Lieutenant Commander Chen, the Admiral's voice resonated with harmonic undertones that made her bones vibrate slightly. Welcome to Kepler-7. I trust your journey was comfortable? Yes, sir. Thank you for the invitation, though I confess I'm uncertain why my presence was requested. Chen kept her posture military straight, hands clasped behind her back in standard protocol. Admiral Kesthok's facial crystals shifted color slightly, indicating what Chen had learned to recognize as mild amusement among his species. Direct, as humans often are. I appreciate that quality. Walk with me, Commander. There are matters we must discuss. They moved through the station's central corridor, past bustling shops and recreational facilities that catered to dozens of species. The artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth standard, making Chen's steps more deliberate than usual. She noticed how other officers made subtle gestures of respect toward the Admiral while eyeing her with curiosity. Tell me about your weapon, Kesthok said suddenly, gesturing toward the sword at her hip. Chen's hand instinctively moved to the leather-wrapped hilt. It's a family heirloom, sir. Passed down through 5 generations of military service. My great-great-grandfather carried it during the Terran colonial wars. A group of young Zentorian officers nearby burst into barely suppressed laughter. Their scaled faces showed obvious disdain as they pointed at Chen's sword and made comments in their clicking language. She didn't need a translator to understand their mockery. A relic from a primitive species, one of them said loudly enough for her to hear, switching to standard galactic common. Humans still think sharp metal can compete with energy weapons. How charmingly backwards. Admiral Kesthok's crystals darkened to a deep purple, but he made no comment about the disrespect. Chen kept her expression neutral, having endured similar treatment countless times during her career. The sword was indeed ancient by galactic standards, forged from Earth steel using techniques that predated humanity's contact with alien civilizations. But it meant something to her that no advanced weapon could replace. Has it ever seen combat? The Admiral asked as they continued walking. Twice, sir. Once during a boarding action when our ship's power grid failed and energy weapons became useless. The second time was during a diplomatic mission gone wrong on Rigel 4. Sometimes the old ways proved surprisingly effective. They entered a secure briefing room where holographic displays showed star charts and tactical information. Chen recognized some of the coordinates as systems along the contested border with the hegemony, humanity's most dangerous enemy. The room's advanced security systems hummed quietly, creating a privacy field that would prevent any electronic surveillance. Commander, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, Kesthok began, his voice dropping to more serious harmonics. 3 weeks ago, Admiral Vorikshan was found dead in his quarters aboard the flagship Determination. The official report states he died of natural causes, but the autopsy revealed something disturbing. Chen frowned. Admiral Vorikshan had been one of the most respected commanders in the Galactic Defense Force, a Nexarian whose tactical brilliance had saved countless lives during the recent hegemony incursions. News of his death had sent shockwaves throughout the military hierarchy. What kind of disturbing, sir? The Admiral activated a holographic display that showed detailed medical scans. Chen tried to maintain her composure as she viewed the images, but something about the wound patterns made her stomach tighten with unexpected recognition. The medical examiner found what appeared to be knife wounds, though the weapon used left unusual markings. The cuts were precise, almost surgical in nature. But here's what troubles me most. Kesthok manipulated the display, highlighting specific areas of the scan. The wound geometry matches no known Galactic Defense Force weapon. Our best analysts have run comparisons against every blade type in our databases. Chen studied the holographic wounds more carefully, her military training automatically analyzing the angle of entry, the depth of penetration, and the distinctive pattern left by the weapon's edge. A chill ran down her spine as certain details became unmistakable. "Sir, these markings, they look consistent with a straight blade design. Single-edged, probably around 36 to 40 centimeters in length. The cutting pattern suggests a weapon designed for both slashing and thrusting attacks." "Very astute observations, Commander. Which brings me to why you're here." The Admiral's crystals shifted to an amber color that Chen recognized as deep concern. 3 human ships were in the sector when Admiral Vorikshan died. Your frigate, the destroyer Valiant, and the cruiser New Horizon. Each vessel underwent thorough security sweeps, but nothing was found. The implication hit Chen like a physical blow. "You suspect a human was involved in the Admiral's death?" "I suspect many things, Commander. What I know is that Admiral Vorikshan was investigating reports of corruption within the Defense Force. He believed someone was providing tactical information to hegemony forces, enabling their recent successes against our border installations. His death was remarkably convenient for whoever wanted those investigations to end." Chen absorbed this information while studying the wound patterns again. The precision of the cuts, the specific angle of entry, even the way the blade had been withdrawn all suggested someone with extensive training in edged weapon combat. Among the technologically advanced species of the galaxy, such skills were virtually unknown. Humans, however, still maintained martial traditions that other species considered primitive curiosities. "What are my orders, sir?" "Officially, you're here for routine tactical briefings and equipment upgrades. Unofficially, I want you to investigate the Admiral's death. You understand human psychology and capabilities in ways my regular staff cannot. If a human was involved, you're our best chance of uncovering the truth." The weight of responsibility settled on Chen's shoulders. Investigating fellow humans for the murder of a respected alien admiral would require delicate handling. Too aggressive an approach might damage the already fragile trust between humanity and its galactic allies. Too cautious, and a traitor might escape justice while compromising future operations. I'll need access to personnel files, security footage, and detailed information about the Admiral's investigations. Already arranged. My aide will provide you with the necessary clearances. But, Commander, be extremely careful. If someone was willing to kill Admiral Vorikshan to protect their secrets, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Chen's communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender identification showed it was from Captain Rodriguez, commander of the destroyer Valiant. She accepted the transmission, and his familiar face appeared on the small display. "Zara, good to see you made it to Kepler 7 safely. I heard you were coming in for briefings. Want to grab dinner tonight? There's a decent Earth cuisine place on level 7 that actually knows how to prepare real steak." "Sounds good, Miguel. Meet you there at 1900 hours? Perfect. Oh, and bring that antique sword of yours. Lieutenant Voss has been bragging about his new Centaurian plasma blade. Might be fun to show these aliens what human steel can do." The transmission ended, leaving Chen with an uncomfortable feeling. Captain Rodriguez had seemed entirely normal, but something about his casual mention of her sword struck her as odd. How did he know she was carrying it? More importantly, why would he specifically want her to bring it to dinner? Admiral Kesthok noticed her expression. "Something wrong, Commander?" "I'm not sure, sir. Probably nothing, but I've learned to trust my instincts. Permission to delay the start of my investigation until tomorrow? I think tonight might provide some interesting insights." The Admiral's crystals shifted to a deep blue that indicated approval. "Granted. But remember what I said about being careful. If your instincts are warning you about something, perhaps you shouldn't go alone." Chen considered this suggestion but ultimately shook her head. If there's something suspicious about Captain Rodriguez's invitation, bringing backup would only make him more cautious. Besides, I can handle myself. She touched the sword at her hip, feeling the familiar weight that had comforted her through countless dangerous situations. The weapon might seem primitive to her galactic colleagues, but it had never failed her when lethal force became necessary. Tonight, she suspected, might test that reliability once again. As they left the briefing room, Chen began mentally preparing for what could be a very dangerous evening. The investigation into Admiral Vorachan's death was about to begin, and she had a growing suspicion that the first lead would come from an unexpected source. The sword that others mocked as a crude relic might soon prove its worth in ways no one anticipated. The station's corridors hummed with activity as shift changes brought fresh crews to their duties. Chen moved through the crowds, noting faces and behavior patterns with the automatic awareness that years of military service had ingrained in her. Everyone seemed normal, going about their routine tasks without apparent concern for the larger mysteries that surrounded Admiral Vorachan's death. But, somewhere among these ordinary people, a killer moved freely. Someone who understood both human weapons and alien anatomy well enough to commit the perfect murder. Tonight, Chen would begin the process of drawing that person into the open, using herself as bait if necessary. The hunt was about to begin. The restaurant on level 7 buzzed with conversation in a dozen different languages as Chen arrived precisely at 1900 hours. The establishment, called Terra Prime, attempted to recreate an Earth atmosphere with holographic windows showing rolling green hills and blue skies. The smell of grilled meat and familiar spices almost masked the recycled air that all space stations shared. Captain Miguel Rodriguez waved from a corner booth, his broad smile and relaxed posture suggesting nothing more threatening than a casual dinner between old friends. Chen approached carefully, noting the positioning of exits and the distribution of other diners. 3 Zentorian officers sat near the main entrance, while a mixed group of humans and Nexarians occupied tables closer to the kitchen. Everyone seemed engaged in normal conversation, but Chen's training had taught her that appearances could be fatally deceiving. "You look tense," Rodriguez observed as she slid into the booth opposite him. "Everything all right?" "Just tired from the journey. You know how transport shuttles are for sleep." Chen kept her voice casual while studying his face for any tells. Rodriguez had served alongside humans long enough to recognize when someone was on edge, but his expression showed only friendly concern. "True enough. I ordered us a bottle of that synthetic wine they serve here. Not quite like the real thing, but close enough after a few glasses." He poured amber liquid into 2 glasses, the motion smooth and practiced. "So what brings you to Kepler 7? The scuttlebutt says you're here for tactical briefings." Chen accepted the wine but didn't drink immediately. "Routine stuff. Fleet wants input on patrol routes and alien psychology from field commanders. Apparently my experience with non-human species qualifies as expertise." "Makes sense. You've always been good at reading alien behavior." Rodriguez raised his glass in a toast. "To understanding our galactic neighbors, even when they drive us crazy." They touched glasses and Chen took a small sip, noting that the wine tasted normal despite her paranoid concerns about poison. Rodriguez drank deeply, which suggested either innocence or very sophisticated planning. As they waited for their food, the conversation turned to mutual acquaintances and recent patrol experiences. "Heard about Admiral Vorachan's death," Rodriguez mentioned casually. "Shame to lose someone with his tactical brilliance." "Natural causes," they said, but at his age that's not exactly surprising. Chen watched his face carefully as he spoke. "Did you know him personally?" "Met him a few times at fleet conferences. Impressive guy, very sharp mind for strategy. Always treated human officers with respect, which wasn't universal among the high command." Rodriguez paused as their server, a young Nexarian with the typical bronze-colored skin of his species, brought their meals. "Actually, I think he specifically requested human ships for some border patrol missions. Said we brought a different perspective to tactical problems." The food provided a temporary distraction as they both focused on cutting their steaks. Chen used the opportunity to observe Rodriguez's hand movements, looking for any unusual dexterity or familiarity with blade work. His knife handling seemed competent but unremarkable, the motions of someone accustomed to eating with utensils rather than fighting with edged weapons. "Speaking of different perspectives," Rodriguez said after swallowing a bite, "I've been curious about that sword you carry. Mind if I take a look? Lieutenant Voss was betting it's just ceremonial, but I've heard stories about you actually using it in combat." Chen's pulse quickened slightly. This was the moment she had anticipated, the reason Rodriguez had specifically mentioned the weapon during their earlier communication. She slowly drew the sword from its sheath, noting how conversations at nearby tables briefly paused as other diners noticed the unusual sight. The blade gleamed under the restaurant's lighting, 38 centimeters of folded steel that her ancestors had forged using techniques passed down through generations. The edge showed the subtle wave pattern that marked genuine Damascus steel, while the crossguard bore engravings that told the story of 5 generations of military service. Rodriguez examined the weapon with apparent appreciation, but Chen noticed how his eyes lingered on specific details: the blade length, the edge geometry, the precise balance point where the weapon would be most effective in combat. His interest seemed more technical than casual. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he commented, testing the weight by lifting the sword carefully. "The balance is exceptional. This wasn't made by some amateur blacksmith. My great-great-grandfather had it forged by a master swordsmith in Toledo. The steel is folded 96 times, creating thousands of layers that give it both flexibility and incredible sharpness." Chen watched Rodriguez handle the weapon, noting that his grip suggested familiarity with sword techniques despite his casual demeanor. "May I?" Rodriguez made a small motion as if to test the blade's sharpness. Chen nodded, curious about his intentions. Rodriguez carefully pressed his thumb against the edge, drawing back immediately as a thin line of blood appeared. The blade had cut through skin with virtually no pressure, demonstrating the razor-sharp edge that Chen maintained through careful daily maintenance. "Impressive. This would go through modern body armor like it wasn't there." Rodriguez sucked on his thumb to stop the bleeding, but his eyes remained focused on the sword. "Have you ever wondered how something this old compares to contemporary weapons?" The question carried undertones that made Chen's instincts flare with warning signals. "In what context?" "Well, energy weapons are obviously more powerful, but they require power cells and can be disrupted by electromagnetic interference. A blade like this would work regardless of technological conditions." Rodriguez's voice remained conversational, but Chen detected a subtle shift in his tone. "Plus, it's completely silent. No energy signature, no muzzle flash, nothing that would show up on security sensors." Chen felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. Rodriguez wasn't making casual conversation about weapon effectiveness. He was describing the exact advantages that an assassin would consider when planning a murder that needed to avoid detection. "Miguel, why are you really interested in my sword?" Rodriguez's friendly expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Just curious about human traditions. We're surrounded by aliens who think our customs are primitive, but sometimes the old ways have advantages they don't appreciate." Chen carefully sheathed the weapon, keeping her movement slow and non-threatening despite the adrenaline beginning to surge through her system. "Like what advantages?" "Unpredictability, mainly. No one expects a blade when they're watching for plasma bolts and disruptor beams." Rodriguez finished his wine and signaled for another bottle. "Take Admiral Vorikshan's death, for example. Everyone assumes it was natural causes because who would expect an assassination using primitive weapons?" The casual mention of the Admiral's death confirmed Chen's worst fears. Rodriguez knew something about the murder, possibly everything. She forced herself to maintain normal behavior while calculating escape routes and potential weapons in their immediate environment. "That's an interesting theory. But the medical report said natural causes." "Medical reports can be incomplete sometimes, especially when the examining physician doesn't know what to look for." Rodriguez smiled, but the expression no longer reached his eyes. "Nexarian anatomy is fascinating. Their circulatory system runs very close to the surface in certain areas. A thin blade, inserted at precisely the right angle, could cause massive internal bleeding while leaving only a tiny external wound." Chen's hand moved instinctively toward her sword, but Rodriguez noticed the motion immediately. "I wouldn't recommend that," he said quietly. "Look around." Chen's peripheral vision caught movement at 3 different tables. The Zentorian officers near the entrance had shifted position to block the main exit, while 2 humans she hadn't noticed before had moved to cover the emergency exits. All of them maintained casual poses, but their positioning was clearly coordinated. "Why, Miguel? What did Admiral Vorikshan discover that was worth killing him for?" Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, no longer pretending friendship. He was getting too close to something that could compromise important operations. The Admiral had this annoying habit of investigating anomalies that were better left alone. "What kind of anomalies?" "Supply shipments that didn't match manifest records. Communication intercepts that suggested someone was providing tactical information to unauthorized parties. Banking records showing credits moving through accounts that shouldn't exist." Rodriguez's voice dropped even lower. Vorachan was building a case that would have exposed a very profitable arrangement between certain humans and certain hegemony contacts. Chen felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You're selling information to the enemy. I'm providing selective intelligence to parties who compensate me appropriately for the risks involved. The war will continue regardless of my activities, but at least I'm ensuring my financial security for the future. Rodriguez glanced at his chronometer. Speaking of which, we need to conclude this conversation. My associates are expecting a report on your investigation progress. What makes you think I'm investigating anything? Rodriguez laughed genuinely for the first time since revealing his true nature. Come on, Zara. Admiral Kestok doesn't bring random patrol commanders to Kepler-7 for routine briefings. You're here because someone suspects human involvement in Vorachan's death, and you're the most qualified investigator available. Chen realized that her cover had been blown from the beginning. Rodriguez had invited her to dinner specifically to assess what she knew and eliminate her as a threat. The casual mention of her sword hadn't been coincidental either. He wanted to examine the weapon that might have created the wound patterns found in the Admiral's body. So what happens now? Now you're going to have a tragic accident. Space stations can be dangerous places, especially for people who wander into restricted areas where they don't belong. Rodriguez stood up slowly, his movements telegraphing readiness for violence. Your sword will disappear along with your body. Very unfortunate, but these things happen during wartime. Chen calculated her options rapidly. 6 hostile contacts in immediate vicinity, unknown number of additional assets elsewhere on the station. Her sword represented her best weapon, but drawing it would trigger immediate lethal response from multiple directions. The restaurant's other patrons would become casualties if violence erupted in the dining area. Before you kill me, she said, buying time to think, I'm curious about something. How did you know the weapon specifics well enough to duplicate the wound pattern? Rodriguez smiled coldly. Who said anything about duplicating? I used your sword to kill Admiral Vorachan. The revelation hit Chen like physical blow. That's impossible. My weapon never left my ship. Security override codes are surprisingly easy to obtain when you have the right contacts. I borrowed your sword for approximately 4 hours while your crew was on shore leave. Vorachan never suspected that his killer was using a weapon registered to one of his most trusted investigators. Chen's mind raced through the implications. If Rodriguez had used her sword to commit murder, then evidence would exist linking her directly to the crime. Even if she survived tonight, she would face accusations of treason and assassination. Her only chance lay in exposing Rodriguez's conspiracy before his associates could eliminate her. The wound patterns won't match perfectly, she said with more confidence than she felt. Every blade leaves unique microscopic markings. Forensic analysis will prove my sword wasn't the murder weapon. Perhaps. But proving your innocence will be difficult from inside a morgue. Rodriguez gestured subtly to his associates. Shall we take a walk? I know a quiet place where we can continue this discussion. Chen knew that leaving the restaurant would mean certain death, but staying would only delay the inevitable while endangering innocent bystanders. She needed a distraction that would allow her to escape and warn Admiral Kestok about the conspiracy. As Rodriguez moved around the table toward her, Chen made her decision. Sometimes the old ways were indeed the most effective, especially when enemies expected sophisticated tactics rather than primitive directness. Her hand flashed to her sword hilt as she dove sideways out of the booth. The restaurant erupted into chaos as Chen's blade cleared its sheath in a silver arc that caught the overhead lighting. Rodriguez lunged forward with surprising speed, but his hand closed on empty air where she had been sitting moments before. Chen rolled behind an overturned table as the first plasma bolt seared through the space her head had occupied. Screams echoed through the dining area as alien patrons dove for cover or fled toward emergency exits. The Nexarian server dropped his tray with a crash that added to the cacophony of panicking voices and running feet. Chen could hear Rodriguez shouting orders to his associates, coordinating their movements to surround her improvised cover. Secure the exits. Don't let her reach the main corridor. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding covert operations. Chen peered around the edge of her overturned table, assessing her tactical situation with the calm efficiency that years of combat had burned into her reflexes. The 3 Zentaurians had spread out to control the restaurant's primary exit, while the 2 humans flanked her position from opposite sides. Rodriguez himself advanced directly toward her hiding spot, a compact disruptor pistol gleaming in his hand. The weapon disparity was overwhelming. 6 enemies with energy weapons against one person carrying a sword that predated galactic civilization by centuries. Any reasonable tactical analysis would conclude that surrender offered better survival odds than resistance. Chen had never been particularly reasonable when cornered. She exploded from cover with a speed that caught Rodriguez off guard, closing the distance between them before he could adjust his aim. The ancient blade swept upward in a diagonal cut that would have opened him from hip to shoulder if he hadn't thrown himself backward with desperate haste. The disruptor bolt that should have ended the fight instead scorched ceiling tiles as Rodriguez stumbled over a fallen chair. Chen pressed her attack with relentless aggression, using her sword's reach advantage to keep Rodriguez's shorter weapon outside effective range. The blade moved in precise patterns that her instructors had drilled into her muscle memory, each cut flowing smoothly into the next defensive position. Steel rang against plasteel as Rodriguez managed to interpose a dining chair between his body and her slashing attacks. "Kill her!" Rodriguez screamed as he continued retreating. "All units converge." The Zentorian officers opened fire from their position near the exit, but their plasma rifles were designed for long-range combat rather than close-quarters fighting in confined spaces. Chen used the restaurant's furniture as improvised shields, diving and rolling between tables while maintaining pressure on Rodriguez. Plasma bolts vaporized chairs and scorched walls, filling the air with smoke and the acrid smell of burning polymers. One of the human operatives attempted to flank Chen from her left side, raising his weapon for a clear shot. Chen's peripheral vision caught the movement just in time. She pivoted on her heel and hurled a heavy metal serving tray with her offhand, striking the gunman across the face with enough force to stagger him backward. His weapon discharged into the ceiling as he fought to regain his balance. Chen followed the thrown tray with a lunging thrust that drove her blade through the operative's shoulder, pinning him against the wall. He screamed and dropped his weapon as steel grated against bone. Chen twisted the blade and withdrew it in one smooth motion, blood spattering the floor as her enemy collapsed. 5 left, she muttered, automatically cataloging remaining threats while scanning for new cover positions. Rodriguez had managed to put more distance between them, using the confusion to reach his remaining associates. The Zentorians were advancing more cautiously now, having realized that their numerical advantage meant little if they couldn't establish clear fields of fire. Their scaled faces showed expressions of professional respect mixed with obvious frustration at Chen's unexpected effectiveness. "Spread out more," Rodriguez commanded. "Force her into the open where we can use our range advantage." Chen realized that staying in the restaurant would eventually result in her death or capture. The space was too confined for extended maneuvering, and Rodriguez's tactical experience was evident in how quickly he adapted to her unconventional fighting style. She needed to reach the main corridor where station security might intervene, or at least where civilian traffic would complicate assassination attempts. The emergency exit behind the kitchen offered the best escape route, but reaching it required crossing 15 meters of open floor space under fire from multiple directions. Chen studied the available cover options and began calculating movement timing based on weapon recharge cycles and reaction speeds. As the Zentorians moved to new positions, Chen noticed something that made her reconsider the tactical situation. Their plasma rifles showed where patterns consistent with extensive use, but the power cell indicators displayed nearly full charges. These weren't standard-issue weapons that had seen normal patrol duty. They were specialist equipment maintained by professionals who expected to need maximum firepower. Rodriguez had assembled a team of experienced killers, not desperate opportunists. The level of coordination and equipment quality suggested substantial financial backing and careful planning. This wasn't a simple case of selling information to enemy contacts. Someone was running a sophisticated intelligence operation that required eliminating inconvenient investigators. "Rodriguez," Chen called out while remaining hidden behind an overturned booth. "Who's really running this operation? You're not smart enough to organize something this elaborate." "Does it matter?" Rodriguez replied from his own concealment. "You'll be dead in the next few minutes regardless." "Maybe. But I'm curious about how deep this conspiracy goes." Admiral Vorichon wasn't just investigating missing supplies, was he? He found something bigger. Chen heard quiet movement as Rodriguez's associates continued maneuvering to surround her position. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they achieved optimal positioning for a coordinated assault. Time to learn what she could and, then, make her escape attempt. The Admiral discovered that entire patrol routes were being compromised, Rodriguez admitted, perhaps hoping to keep her talking while his people moved into position. Hegemony forces always seem to know exactly where our ships would be and when. Too much coincidence for random luck. So you were providing fleet movement schedules to enemy commanders. Among other things. Patrol routes, supply convoy timing, communication codes, defensive positions of border installations. Very profitable information for the right buyers. Chen felt sick as the scope of Rodriguez's treason became clear. How many ships had been destroyed because their positions were known in advance? How many good officers and crew members had died to line Rodriguez's pockets with enemy credits? The hegemony must pay extremely well for that level of intelligence. Well enough to retire comfortably after this war ends. Which it will, regardless of who wins. I'm simply ensuring my future security. By betraying everyone who trusted you. By being realistic about human prospects in a galaxy dominated by more advanced species. We're tolerated allies at best, expendable resources at worst. Better to profit from that reality than pretend otherwise. Chen heard the soft scrape of scaled feet moving across debris, indicating that the Zentorians had nearly completed their flanking maneuver. Rodriguez's philosophy disgusted her, but she couldn't waste mental energy on moral outrage while fighting for survival. The time had come to make her break for freedom. She pulled a small device from her belt and armed it with quick finger movements. The emergency beacon would broadcast her location and status to station security, hopefully bringing help before Rodriguez could eliminate all witnesses to their conversation. But activation would also reveal her exact position to her enemies. Chen counted down from 3, gathering herself for explosive movement. At 0, she activated the beacon and hurled it toward the kitchen while simultaneously sprinting in the opposite direction toward the main exit. The ruse worked perfectly. 2 plasma bolts converged on the beacon's location as Chen dove through the restaurant's entrance and into the main corridor. She rolled to her feet and began running toward the nearest security checkpoint, ignoring the startled exclamations of civilians who scattered out of her path. Behind her, Rodriguez's voice roared with frustrated rage. After her. Don't let her reach security. Chen's boots pounded against the station's deck plating as she sprinted through corridors that suddenly seemed endless. Her sword remained in her hand, the familiar weight providing comfort despite the inadequacy of steel against energy weapons in open combat. Station personnel pressed against the walls as she passed, their faces showing confusion and alarm at the sight of a human officer fleeing with drawn weapon. Emergency klaxons began wailing as the security beacon's signal reached the station's automated systems. Red lights flashed in time with the warning sounds, indicating that emergency protocols were now active throughout Kepler 7. Chen felt a surge of hope that help might arrive before Rodriguez's team could corner her again. The hope lasted until plasma bolts began searing past her head from behind. Chen zigzagged desperately as Rodriguez and his surviving associates pursued her down the corridor. Their weapons had longer range and greater accuracy than her sword, but the crowded station environment limited their ability to fire freely without hitting innocent bystanders. An Nexarian family with 3 small children cowered against a storefront as Chen passed, their bronze faces tight with terror. Chen angled her path to put herself between the civilians and her pursuers, using her own body as a shield while she continued running. Plasma bolts scorched the walls inches from her position, but Rodriguez seemed reluctant to fire through her toward potential civilian casualties. The moral restraint wouldn't last long once he realized that witnesses posed as much threat to his operation as Chen's escape. Chen reached a major intersection where multiple corridors converged around a central plaza. Station security officers were already responding to the emergency signals, their heavy combat armor and military-grade weapons marking them as capable professionals rather than ceremonial guards. Chen felt relief wash over her as she spotted the familiar blue uniforms that represented safety and backup. The relief turned to horror as the security officers raised their weapons and pointed them directly at her. "Drop your weapon and surrender immediately." The lead officer's voice boomed through his armor's external speakers. "You are under arrest for assault with deadly weapon and disturbing station peace." Chen skidded to a halt, her mind racing to process this unexpected development. Rodriguez had somehow contacted security and identified her as the aggressor rather than the victim. The surviving members of his assassination team were probably melting back into the crowd, leaving her alone to face charges for defending herself against murderers and traitors. "Officer, you don't understand. I'm Lieutenant Commander Chen, Galactic Defense Force." The men pursuing me are enemy agents who killed Admiral Vorikshan. We have video evidence of you attacking civilians with an edged weapon in Terra Prime restaurant. Surrender now or we will use lethal force. Chen realized that Rodriguez had prepared for this contingency by positioning surveillance assets to record selected portions of their restaurant confrontation. Edited properly, the footage would show her drawing her sword and attacking apparently innocent diners rather than defending herself against assassins. The security cordon was tightening around her position, cutting off potential escape routes while Rodriguez and his people disappeared into the station's general population. Soon she would be in custody, charged with crimes that carried mandatory death sentences, while the real traitors continued selling human lives to enemy forces. Behind her, Chen could hear Rodriguez's voice speaking urgently into a personal communicator. Package secured. Implementing Extraction Protocol 7. All assets disperse and await further instructions. Chen looked at the assembled security officers, their weapons trained on her with professional precision, then, at the crowds of civilians whose terror-filled faces showed they believed she was the dangerous criminal threatening their safety. Sometimes, she realized, the only way to prove innocence was to commit spectacular guilt. Chen raised her hand slowly, making sure the security officers could see her compliance, then, deliberately turned to face Rodriguez who was attempting to blend into the crowd of evacuating civilians. Her voice carried across the plaza with parade ground authority that made everyone freeze in place. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, Galactic Defense Force, I formally accuse you of treason, murder, and conspiracy with enemy forces. By the authority vested in me under Article 12 of the Military Justice Code, I demand immediate arrest and interrogation. Rodriguez's face went pale as hundreds of witnesses focused their attention on him. The formal accusation, delivered in regulation military terminology, carried legal weight that even station security couldn't ignore. More importantly, it created an official record that would require investigation regardless of whatever charges Rodriguez had fabricated against Chun. She's delusional, Rodriguez called out to the security officers. Combat stress from her unprovoked attack on innocent civilians. She needs medical attention, not an audience for her paranoid fantasies. But Chen had calculated her gambit carefully. Station security protocols required investigation of all formal military accusations, especially those involving treason charges. The lead security officer's weapon remained trained on her, but his helmet turned slightly toward Rodriguez with obvious uncertainty about how to proceed. Chen pressed her advantage. Officer, I am requesting formal protection while providing evidence of enemy infiltration. Captain Rodriguez has confessed to selling fleet movement schedules to hegemony forces and murdering Admiral Vorikshan to prevent discovery of his activities. Lies and delusion, Rodriguez insisted, but Chen noticed sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the station's controlled environment. Then, you won't object to forensic examination of your personal equipment and financial records, Chen replied. Standard procedure for treason investigations includes complete audit of all accounts and communications for the past 12 months. Rodriguez's confident expression faltered as he realized the trap closing around him. Any investigation would reveal the evidence trail that Vorikshan had been following, along with the unusually large credit transfers that Rodriguez couldn't explain through normal military salary. His only escape lay in eliminating Chen before she could provide detailed testimony about their restaurant conversation. Security team, this woman is clearly mentally unstable. She attacked multiple civilians with a deadly weapon and is now making wild accusations to avoid responsibility for her actions. I recommend immediate sedation and psychiatric evaluation. The lead security officer remained motionless for several seconds, clearly weighing competing claims from two Galactic Defense Force officers. Station protocols provided guidelines for handling military personnel disputes, but the situation had escalated far beyond normal jurisdictional boundaries. Chen decided to force the issue by providing information that only the real traitor would know. Officer, ask Captain Rodriguez to explain how he knew Admiral Vorikshan's investigation schedule well enough to arrange a meeting in the Admiral's private quarters. Ask him to explain why his ship's communication logs show encrypted transmissions to coordinates inside hegemony space. Ask him to explain why his personal accounts received large credit transfers from numbered accounts on neutral worlds immediately after successful hegemony attacks on Defense Force installations. Each accusation hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Chen was revealing details that would inevitably be discovered during any thorough investigation, destroying his ability to claim innocence or ignorance. His only remaining option involved immediate violence before security officers could act on her information. Rodriguez's hand moved toward the concealed weapon under his jacket with smooth desperation. Chen saw the motion and shouted a warning while throwing herself sideways, but the security officers reacted with trained reflexes that made human movement seem sluggish by comparison. Plasma bolts from 3 different weapons converged on Rodriguez's position before he could clear his holster. The traitor's body vaporized instantly, leaving only a small pile of ash and the acrid smell of ionized matter. His weapon clattered harmlessly to the deck plating, its barrel still glowing from unreleased energy. The plaza fell silent except for the continued wailing of emergency klaxons. Civilians stared in shock at the spot where Rodriguez had been standing moments before, their minds struggling to process the sudden violence. Chen slowly lowered herself from her defensive crouch, keeping her hands visible while the security officers maintained their ready positions. "Officer," she said quietly, "I recommend immediate lockdown of all personnel who were in contact with Captain Rodriguez during the past 72 hours. His conspiracy involved multiple assets throughout the station, and they'll attempt extraction now that their leader has been eliminated." The lead security officer's helmet swiveled toward her with mechanical precision. "You will surrender your weapon and submit to detention while we investigate these allegations." "Understood and agreed." Chen carefully sheathed her sword and placed her hands behind her head in the standard surrender position. "But please contact Admiral Kestok immediately. He's expecting a report on my investigation, and the information I've discovered requires immediate action to prevent further security breaches." As security officers moved to secure Chen with energy restraints, she felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Rodriguez was dead, but his conspiracy extended beyond one man's greed. The sophisticated operation he had described required substantial support infrastructure and multiple layers of personnel. Eliminating the visible leadership wouldn't necessarily destroy the organization's ability to continue functioning. Admiral Kestok arrived in the plaza within minutes, his crystalline features reflecting the flashing emergency lights in constantly shifting patterns. His retinue included senior staff officers from multiple species, all wearing expressions of grim concern as they surveyed the scene of destruction. "Commander Chen," the Admiral's harmonics carried relief mixed with professional interest. "I trust you have information that justifies this dramatic turn of events." "Yes, sir." Captain Rodriguez confessed to providing tactical intelligence to hegemony forces, including fleet movement schedules and defensive positions. He admitted using my sword to murder Admiral Vorikshan when the Admiral's investigation threatened to expose the conspiracy. Admiral Kestok's crystals shifted to deep purple, indicating the profound anger that his species experienced when confronting betrayal. "Continue." Chen provided a detailed account of her restaurant confrontation with Rodriguez, including his confession about stealing her sword and his knowledge of Nexarian anatomy. The Admiral listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific technical details. "The wound patterns found in Admiral Vorikshan's body," Chen concluded, "will show microscopic tool marks from my blade. But they will also show evidence of hurried cleaning and resharpening that occurred after the murder. Rodriguez didn't have time to restore the weapon to its original condition before returning it to my quarters." "Forensic analysis will confirm or disprove your theory," the Admiral agreed. "But, assuming your account proves accurate, we face a larger problem." Captain Rodriguez mentioned associates and extraction protocols. "His conspiracy clearly involves more personnel than a single ship commander." Chen nodded grimly. "Yes, sir." The Zentorian officers who supported him in the restaurant showed familiarity with specialist equipment and professional combat techniques. This wasn't a hastily assembled group of opportunists. Someone has been recruiting and organizing assets throughout the defense force. Admiral Kestok activated his personal communicator and began issuing rapid orders in multiple languages. Within minutes, security lockdowns were implemented throughout Kepler 7, preventing any departures while investigation teams conducted thorough searches for additional conspirators. Communication logs, financial records, and personal equipment from all personnel associated with Rodriguez would undergo comprehensive analysis. "Commander," the Admiral said after completing his immediate orders, "your unconventional investigative methods have provided crucial intelligence. However, your actions also resulted in significant property damage and civilian trauma. Standard procedure requires formal review of your conduct." "Understood, sir. I accept full responsibility for my decisions and their consequences." "Good. You will remain in protective custody while we process the intelligence you've gathered." Your safety is now a priority concern, since eliminating you would prevent testimony that could expose additional conspiracy members. As security officers prepared to escort Chen to secure quarters, Admiral Kesthok made one final observation that chilled her blood despite its intended reassurance. Commander, your primitive weapon proved remarkably effective against enemies who expected sophisticated tactics. Perhaps our alien allies have underestimated human capabilities more seriously than we realized. The words carried implications that extended far beyond Chen's immediate investigation. If Rodriguez had successfully sold Defense Force secrets to enemy forces, then human reliability would be questioned throughout the Galactic Alliance. Trust, once broken, required years to rebuild, especially when that trust involved military cooperation between species with vastly different technological capabilities. Chen was escorted through corridors that showed obvious signs of recent combat, scorch marks from plasma weapons, damaged bulkheads, and emergency repair crews working to restore normal operations. Station personnel watched her passage with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The official story would eventually reveal Rodriguez's treason, but initial reports had portrayed Chen as the aggressor. Her secure quarters included comprehensive entertainment systems and communication access, but the energy barriers across the entrance made clear that she remained a prisoner despite the comfortable accommodations. Chen settled into a chair facing the viewport that showed stars wheeling slowly past as the station maintained its orbital position. Somewhere among those stars, hegemony forces were using intelligence that Rodriguez had provided to plan attacks against Defense Force installations. Ships would die because their patrol routes had been compromised. Bases would fall because their defensive positions were known in advance. Good people would pay the ultimate price for one man's greed and moral cowardice. But Rodriguez's operation had been exposed before causing maximum damage. His death would disrupt communication channels and force his surviving conspirators to abandon established procedures. The investigation that Admiral Vorikshan had begun would continue with new urgency and broader scope. Chen touched the sword at her hip, feeling the weight that had carried her through the deadliest night of her career. The weapon that others mocked as a primitive relic had proved its worth when technological superiority failed to provide answers. Sometimes the old ways were indeed the most reliable, especially when enemies underestimated their effectiveness. 3 hours later, Chen's communicator chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Kesthok. The transmission contained preliminary investigation results that confirmed her account of Rodriguez's conspiracy while revealing additional disturbing information. Forensic analysis of Rodriguez's personal effects had uncovered communication devices using hegemony encryption protocols, credit transfers totaling millions of standard units, and detailed intelligence files containing classified Defense Force information. His quarters contained maps showing current patrol routes, defensive positions, and supply convoy schedules that matched exactly with recent enemy attack patterns. More troubling were the personnel records that suggested Rodriguez's network extended to at least 12 additional Defense Force officers across 6 different installations. The conspiracy represented years of careful recruitment and organization, with Rodriguez serving as a regional coordinator rather than the primary leadership. Admiral Vorikshan's death had been ordered by higher authorities who remained unidentified despite the comprehensive intelligence the admiral had gathered. His investigation had focused on supply irregularities and communication anomalies, missing the deeper structure of organized treason that pervaded multiple levels of the Defense Force hierarchy. The message concluded with new orders that reflected the expanded scope of the security crisis. Chen would be transferred to Fleet Headquarters on Proxima Base, where her testimony would be recorded under optimal security conditions. The investigation would continue under direct oversight from the highest levels of Galactic Command. But Admiral Kesthok's final paragraph contained information that made Chen smile despite the gravity of their situation. The forensic examination of her sword had revealed microscopic evidence that completely exonerated her from any involvement in Admiral Vorikshan's murder while providing crucial clues about Rodriguez's methods and timing. More importantly, the investigation had demonstrated that human unconventional tactics could prove decisive when facing technologically superior enemies who relied too heavily on predictable procedures. Chen's willingness to use primitive methods had broken open a conspiracy that conventional investigation techniques might have missed entirely. The sword that aliens mocked as a crude relic had helped save the Galactic Alliance from infiltration and betrayal. Sometimes, Chen reflected, the old ways were the best ways, especially when combined with courage and determination to seek truth regardless of personal cost. Her watch stood ended, but the larger battle for galactic security had only just begun. The enemy had revealed their hand by assassinating Admiral Vorakshan, but they had also exposed their methods and vulnerabilities. Now the defense force could begin hunting the hunters with weapons both ancient and modern. In the depths of space, human steel had proved its worth against alien treachery. The galaxy would remember that lesson when the next crisis tested the bonds between species who fought together against the darkness that threatened them all. Chen closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges in the ongoing war between those who protected civilization and those who would destroy it for profit. Her sword lay quiet at her side, ready for whatever battles the future might demand.